in recognition of
just go ahead
of that. Cahirlock, I think it would have been very appropriate had Meat Industry Ireland been part of this session. I don't know if there was a particular reason why that
it's
didn't
just
happen.
we've worked as representatives in this one, and we'll Meat Industry Ireland in the next one. But you'll have an opportunity to ask them questions at the next one.
No, I accept that, but I think this would have been just a more appropriate forum. But notwithstanding that, I just have a number of questions, and considering the limited time, I'd ask speakers to be brief. So to Ms King, there was quite a bit of debate earlier on in relation to the fact that COVID-19 isn't a notifiable illness, and the apparent lack of urgency or even want on the part of the HSA for it to become a notifiable illness. Now, we heard from government parties earlier on lamenting the fact that it wasn't. We also heard from Deputy O'Reilly saying that she has legislation that would ensure that it is. Could I ask Ms King as briefly as possible to give an indication as to why she believes there would be a reluctance by the HSA or any of the statutory bodies for COVID-19 to be a notifiable illness under the legislation?
Certainly, in any of the queries and questions I have put directly, the main response has been the question of resources, that the resource level that the organisation would need to have this, if this were to happen, would be very large. And so from that point of view, it seems to me that's certainly one of the areas of or causes of resistance to it.
Okay, thank you. I might just ask Mr Ennis to deal with the next couple of questions, but they're broad, so if other guests want to jump in. Just briefly, we've had a bit of a conversation with regard to the issue of workers and employment contracts and the apparent lack of transparency. Does the lack of transparency that penetrates right throughout the meat industry have an impact in relation to our state being able to adequately prepare and prevent issues relating to COVID-19?
Deputy Carthy, absolutely it does. And as I said earlier to one of your colleagues, we need now to shine this spotlight. It's focused on the industry, but we need to turn up the glow, and we need to expose how workers are being treated within the industry, because without that, we will be back here again talking about this in a number of months.
Thank you. Mr Ennis, why would a company, as I understand is the case almost throughout the food industry, why would a company decide to be unlimited as opposed to limited in its structure?
Probably it's less regulation, but that's a matter for the companies. But as I said, you seem to have a lot of that in this industry and others, and it might be taking people out of the limelight and taking them out of the spotlight that needs to be shone on them.
Say that,
less liability.
Chairman, you'll recall last year during the factory protests that we're talking about, that farmers lamented very strongly the lack of transparency in the sector. So we've even heard today about some of the focus being put on retailers or others in relation to who's the cause. But one of the difficulties is, in fact, one of our speakers suggested that there was an issue pertaining to turnover being quoted rather than profits, which might be very different. But in most instances, we don't know the profits that these companies are used, and particularly because of the structure they use. Mr Ennis, I'm told that Kildare Chilling Company operates under the following basis: that the registered company, Kildare Chilling Company Unlimited, is owned by a company called Cassia Unlimited, which is registered in the Isle of Man. Cassia Unlimited is in turn owned by Courtline Holdings, which is actually an unlimited Irish registered company. Courtland Holdings is owned by Rapbeg Investment, which is an unlimited Irish registered company, which in turn is owned by Kilcourt Investments, which in turn is owned...
Deputy Carthy, you know the parliamentary practice.
Well, could I ask if Mr Ennis or any of our speakers could indicate why possibly did any company operate under such a structure?
I don't know, Deputy, unless it may have something to hide. I don't know, but it's a complex web throughout this industry, and I wouldn't single out any company, to be fair. I think it's a complex web of agency workers, sole traders, poor conditions of employment, massive turnovers with profits at the expense, in this case of COVID, of workers' health. And
I can say
that in itself,
all of the companies
is a scandal.
that are involved in
yes,
the most
and I'm glad
recent,
that Mr Ennis doesn't want to single out any company in particular.
No, well, this
saying
is
that
only
it's a generic problem
this is all publicly
sector.
available information that I'm citing here,
Okay,
Chairman, and I'm open to be corrected if any of the entities
I've
want
no
to.
desire to correct you, but
because
other
I know,
than
for
on the
example,
practice of
Carol
naming companies.
Cuisine is actually, when you go through the link, is essentially owned by a Luxembourg holding company. So if we are going to learn anything from these situations and the situation that has been highlighted as a result of COVID-19, well then clearly we need to move to a point where there's transparency and accountability. This was deemed an essential service. These workers and these companies were operating at a time when lots of other companies couldn't under law. It seems to me to beg our belief, and I'll ask the speakers for their comment on this, that how something that would be described as essential, and somebody would be described as an essential worker during a global pandemic would be earning €10.10 an hour. How does that make sense? And that's my final question to our speakers.
Well, Deputy, I've dealt with this in an earlier commentary. It makes no sense at all, and I've said on record for 4 months that essentiality needs to be recognised in terms and conditions. And I just really concerned when our approach was to have this task force and to get this matter sorted once and for all. It has been turned down. Mandatory temperature testing was turned down. Meetings with the employers group, Meat Industry Ireland, was turned down until earlier this week. They have now gone off at our charter to talk to their members and respond on September the 1st to our request for formal engagement and negotiation on proper terms and conditions for essential workers.
Ms King or other guest?
Well, I mean, I think that you know, we have gone through all the efforts that we have made. You know, the fundamental flaw that I believe there is in the lack of legislation to cover off to ensure that workers have a voice. There is no balance. But ultimately, all of the listing that you gave there about the company structures and so on, I mean, to me, that makes the case for a task force in terms of to look at the whole gamut of what's happening in the industry. But very quickly, that should in no way interrupt the focus on fixing the matter of the health and safety and protection of the workers immediately. And that should not in any way interrupt anybody's focus in terms of, I hope the questions are asked later on in relation to the HSA and doing what we believe should be done to arrest this, to contain it, and indeed we could eliminate it if we do it correctly.
Is there time for Ms Lebeau to give a...
There's 10 seconds, yeah.
Yes, if I may have a statement too on this issue, I would just like to emphasize how hard it is for workers to obtain proper health and safety given the union busting techniques that a lot of employers resort to in these meatpacking plants. And we have had many cases of workers who have unionized or have unionized colleagues whose relatives were then denied employment in the same factories, who are blacklisted in the whole area from all factories in the whole area if they left their employment or they fought for their rights at work. And while we have recent cases of, for instance, workers managing to establish a health and safety committee in their factory and to kick out the agency who was exploiting them and be directly employed, and these are important victories, it is almost heroic for these migrant workers to achieve anything because there is a lot of harassment and intimidation and a lot of efforts, conjugated efforts from agencies and direct employers to eliminate unions from the equation. And unions would need stronger powers in this country if workers are to have their rights supported.
I would ask also that you respect the chair, because we do have to get through another speaker, and that's who sat here patiently for some time, Deputy